Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are about to try to help in our effort to save the Oakland A's by participating in the first-year player draft. I think this is going to be a relatively short episode. I know I say that sometimes and then they end up running as long as average. But there's two big things that I need to do here in the month of July. First is the player draft, and then second is spending a fair amount of time figuring out if there's anyone on this team we can possibly sell for prospects to hopefully build around in the future. And I think that second part is going to take some time, more importantly offline than online. More importantly, not while doing a video than in the brief moments we get to spend together during these videos. So because of that, this video is really just going to focus on the draft. I've gotten into a pretty good cadence of putting out videos most days in this series. I imagine that will slow at some point, but I do sincerely appreciate all of the loyal viewership and all of the new viewers and all of the veteran viewers and everyone who shares their comments with us. So I wanted to make sure to kind of do what I could to keep that momentum going by getting out a video, even if it may be a bit shorter. So as I said, we are going to focus on the draft here, and our A's are picking as late as they have in the draft in these now 4 years that we've participated in the draft. We had the 4th overall pick in 2024, 10th overall in 2025, got lucky and got 4th overall last year. And you can see this year we are picking 14th overall. We actually moved back a spot, but that was really driven more by the compensatory pick given to the White Sox as far as the ping pong balls or the frozen envelopes. We were right where we needed to be and expected to be in the draft lottery this year. And even though we're picking 14th, we have some pretty interesting options, and it seems like a relatively deep draft this year, at least in terms of the star ratings is a very rough guide to how our scout views the ceilings of these players. Particularly with the pitchers, I feel like there will be some decent starting pitching prospects who likely make it to our spot in the second round. So that could make it a little less likely that I'll take a pitcher in the first round. That said, we've got some real interesting decisions to make, and I do appreciate our worldwide scouting department coming through for me with ideas, as you always do. Probably had the most divergence in opinions of the player that we should go with that I can ever remember. There is a bit of a consensus from the group as to which player to go with, but a lot of different players were mentioned for our number one pick, 14th overall, and we'll talk about them here. Andrew Cuervo brought up Andres Rojas, the very interesting knuckleballer, and both Paul West and DLL First Base 14 noted that if we could somehow get him in the second round, that would be incredible value. I do agree with that. I'm not sure if he'll survive to the second round. The reason he might, even though he is that very unique knuckleballer, he's durable. He's a knuckleballer that throws in the mid-90s already at 20 years old, and we think his stuff could potentially be off the charts devastating to go with plus movement and excellent control. So there are a ton of things to like about him, but he is viewed by the game as a reliever. He only has 35 stamina. Now, granted, we can improve that in the development lab if we get lucky. And his competition at UConn Avery Point has not been a particularly high level of competition. And, a 2.13 ERA at the JUCO level, not sure exactly how that translates into the majors. But that being said, the knuckleball is a peculiar beast, particularly in this game. And I think it would be really fun to have a knuckleballer to nurture and hopefully bring up through our organization. As Andrew noted, even a 2-pitch knuckleballer can still potentially be a pretty effective starter. So I'm very intrigued by him. There's also been comments in recent episodes that we should perhaps be a little more willing to take college players who are closer to the majors. And certainly when you look at the ratings from Rojas right now with 45 stuff in movement and 40 control, he's not too far away from being able to contribute in the majors at all. So very interesting player that is definitely under consideration. If we didn't pick him and somehow he dropped to the second round, that would be incredible value, and I would be running the card up to the commissioner at that point. Not counting on it happening, but stranger things have happened. Another player who was mentioned was the pitcher Bobby Holloway. Marilee Murphy, who's been a proponent of us going after college players, mentioned the App State product, another guy who does not look too far off of being major league quality. I made the point in the last episode that with 55 stuff, 55 movement, 60 control, and a changeup that's seems unlikely to give him a real quality fourth pitch, that I kind of viewed Holloway as maybe a fourth or fifth starter as a ceiling. Marilee made the point that I might be a little harsh with that evaluation, and that certainly with the development lab, it's typically relatively easy for people to work on a secondary pitch, which could result in the stuff being even better for Holloway. So another player who is certainly in the mix as a lefty starter who would be closer to major league quality, looking for slot. Rojas has the benefit of, in theory, looking for even less than slot, which is probably going to make him pretty attractive and probably ensure that he's not around for the second round. But I think both of these college pitchers are interesting. Don't worry, I don't know where you live also made the point that we should probably just go after a college player. So I hear that feedback. I get it. Holloway and Rojas are both certainly in the mix. But as I did note earlier, I do feel like there will be a good pitcher available to us in the second round when we're picking in the late 40s, early 50s, I'm guessing, with compensatory picks in between the round. Now, it very well may not be Rojas or Holloway, but I think there will be potential for us to pick up a pretty good pitcher in the second round, and maybe it'll be one of those guys. So I think I'm leaning towards a position player, but we'll talk through this live with you and hopefully come to a wise, or at the very least defensible, decision. Kevin Wilkerson, another JUCO player who fits that college mold that some of you would like me to focus on more, was recommended by Joanna Campbell. And there's certainly a lot to like about Wilkerson. Durable, high adaptability and work ethic, very strong defensively, and I love that potential 70 contact with average or slightly above average gap power, and eye. Don't love the poor competition level, but I think you're going to see that with most JUCOs in the game. I am really concerned about the lack of speed. The gap power is only a little above average, so it's not critical for there. But even with this great contact, there's going to be some hard hit balls in the infield that Wilkerson's just not going to beat out. That said, with the 70 contact, still think he's going to be a pretty high average hitter. So definitely someone interesting to think about. I like those personality traits. I really like the defense, and the bat with that potentially excellent contact is interesting for a middle infielder, and that durability guarantees most likely that really nice glove is going to be out there 150 plus games for you if you want it to be. Finally, the last few players that viewers had opinions on are getting more into my wheelhouse of high ceiling, low floor high schoolers. And the notorious KEV mentioned Jesus Guevara, and it's pretty hard to argue with this bat. The negatives: no speed, mediocre defensively, but still a player with potentially 70 contact, 70 power, who can also draw a fair amount of walks. He's been putting up some monster seasons in high school. So a very interesting player to consider in Mr. Guevara. I'm probably looking for someone a little more well-rounded, but we do need bats in the organization, and it's hard to argue with the potential upside of Jesus Guevara. Mentioned in the last episode, David Mireles, and Not My Four-Ply noted that tools-wise, Mireles is probably the top player in the draft. Like me, Not My Four-Ply is a bit concerned about some of those negative personality traits, most notably the low work ethic in terms of getting a high schooler completely developed, but a competent defensive player who probably ends up at corner outfield spot or DH. Maybe you could play Mireles at third, or a right-hander at first base if you... probably not. So there's a lot not to like, but the bat is incredibly well-rounded, above average at everything, potentially 70 contact, 80 gap power, 55 power, 60 eye, has blazing speed to take advantage of that contact, and particularly the gap power. Could be an absolute monster offensively if Mireles completely develops. I do just worry, though, with some of those negative personality traits that the development will be hard to come by. We've been picking players in the draft who generally have really positive personality traits, and we're still struggling to get some momentum going in our lower parts of our organization, and don't have a ton of confidence that we'll be able to guide Mireles to meet his full potential. So very intriguing, but probably not the direction I'll go. And Mireles is also looking for $8.5 million, which is a couple million above slot at this point. So expensive, bad personality traits, probably not the direction I'll go. And I mentioned earlier, although there were a lot of diverse opinions, which is really helpful, gives me a lot of players to dig into deeply, there was consensus, and that consensus was around the player that I think I was kind of leaning towards when I did my initial look at the draft yesterday. And that's the shortstop David Ramirez. And as I mentioned, a lot of people were proponents of Ramirez. John Hunter, Mace Jr.'s Gaming, Not My Four-Ply, Fake Name, DLL First Base 14. Joanna Campbell had Ramirez as her second choice. So a fair amount of momentum for the triple machine. Competent defensively. has the high work ethic we like to see, and a pretty interesting bat for a middle infielder. Potentially above average at everything. 65 contact, 65 power, 65 eye if everything develops, along with plus gap power and decent speed. Not a great bunter. Not looking for a ton of money either, though, which could help us if we do try to get creative and hope that someone interesting falls to us in the second round. So there's a lot to like about Ramirez. We looked at a few other players in a little more depth that I talked about in the last episode, but not anyone that we're thinking about seriously. I think our worldwide scouting department, as I mentioned, came through well again for us and kind of highlighted a lot of the more interesting players out there. If I had to go with a pitcher, it would definitely be the college knuckleballer Andres Rojas. Love the durability, love the potential crazy stuff. It would be so fun to play with that knuckleball. Not looking for a lot of money. The stamina concerns me, but we can address that in the lab. I do think there is some small chance that being listed as a reliever, Rojas falls to the second round. I'm not counting on it. It's going to be a huge victory if it does happen. The fact that he's not looking for much money certainly works against us in terms of hoping that he'll be around 35 picks from now. But as I mentioned, between Holloway, Rojas, and then some of these other four-star pitchers that I haven't talked about deeply yet, I think we're going to have a pretty interesting pitcher to pick in the second round if we want to. And I honestly think with the depth of the hitters that we're going to have an interesting guy to bounce back in the second round as far as everyday players as well. But I really think we're going to get a pitcher, if we want to go pitcher, that we like in the second round. And there's some, admittedly not high, but some non-zero probability that Rojas or Holloway will still be available then. So we're going to go with an everyday player here. Continue trying to bolster this organization with some guys who can hit. In Morales, I just can't spend $8.5 million on a guy with low work ethic. As much as I love the tools, if we go cheap in the first round and Morales with that high demand happens to linger in the second round, could give us a real interesting decision to try to make. But we're not going to go with him. Wilkerson, I think there's a slim chance he falls to the second round also. Another JUCO player facing off against a poor competition level. I really like the glove, like the work ethic, like the contact. Don't love the lack of speed. So we're going back to high school. Guevara is very toolsy as a hitter, but he's not that well-rounded. So we're going to go with the consensus and go with David Ramirez. Well above average contact power and ability to draw walks if he completely develops. You'd hope with the great coaching we have in our organization and that high work ethic that he's got a pretty good chance of developing a competent defensive player, probably a natural third baseman more than a second baseman or a shortstop, in my view. Also could play left or right if we needed him to. Not looking for a ton of money. Triple machine is certainly the way I'm leaning. We'll see what the scouting director recommends. He recommends the toolsy Mireles, who, as I noted, is about 2.5 million over slot, a little more than I had expected. If we were to recommend a pitcher, it's Deathblow Ramiro, who we talked about last time around. Potential 6-pitch arsenal, just really didn't like the personality, liked some of the other pitchers better, also looking for a ton of money. If we were to go after a reliever, he recommends Rojas. I don't think Rojas is going to be around in the second round. He's so tempting. This is a tough decision for me. It would just be so much fun to have that knuckleballer on this team. He's also closer to the majors, which could help us keep our job. But I'm going to assume I've got at least another season after this one with Mr. Fisher, with his leash. Although we're having an awful year, the worst year of our 4 years here so far. He gave us a good evaluation midway through. I don't think we're going to play worse than a 377 winning percentage the rest of the way, so we'll probably be a little better over the last 72 games of the year. And I feel like we can get a pitcher that I'm going to like a lot in the second round. So we're going to go with Ramirez, not looking for a ton of money, and cross our fingers that maybe the OOTP and baseball gods will smile on us. Draft Ramirez. Auto draft till our next pick. A lot of talented position players still around. But who's available as a pitcher? And there's a lot of those 4-star pitchers that I mentioned still around, but both Holloway and Rojas are off the list. We'll see where they went. Mireles, the Toolsy player, went 22 overall. Looks like they lasted a while. Shortstop Wilkerson was with a supplemental pick. Rojas lasted until the 9th pick of the second round, so we weren't too far away from having a shot at the knuckleballer, and Bobby Holloway went first in the second round. So we gambled that one of them would fall to us. They both did last till the second round, but not quite far enough. Guevara, the real interesting hitting prospect, also lasted to the second round. So we could have had some really interesting decisions to make if just a couple picks had gone a different direction. But not to be the case, but I think there's still someone we're going to be pretty happy with in round number 2. And Ramirez fortunately demanded that $1.3 million. Sometimes when you draft a player, they end up looking for more, closer to slot. But he looked like he was going to be pretty easy for us to sign, and should be. So that does give us flexibility to potentially not care as much about what the player is looking for here in the second round and go with the guy that we like the most. And it is kind of interesting in a year where we didn't have to spend a lot of money with our first round pick that the talent in the second round generally isn't looking for a ton of money. So maybe there will be a lower quality player in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round that we can overbid on a bit or pay over slot more accurately. My hope is that maybe one of these 4-star or higher everyday players falls to us in the 3rd round. I don't think it's impossible that that will happen. There's no one I'm in love with. We mentioned Kevin Stubblefield, the 5-star prospect, in the previous episode. Pretty interesting bat. 60 contact, 70 gap power, 70 power, average eye. Decent speed. Just doesn't bring much to the table defensively. But the bat is certainly interesting. I don't think he'll be around, especially only looking for 1.1 million in the third round. But he would be a home run there. I did kind of make my decision in the first round, thinking we'd go with a pitcher in the second round if there was someone we liked available. And there are some interesting guys. And similar to the hitters, none of them are looking for crazy money. Jonathan Turpin, starting pitching prospect, potentially a 4-pitch guy if everything works out, although don't have a ton of confidence that slider will, but could have well above average stuff, plus movement, plus control if everything works out. A fine pitching prospect. Really like Luis Silva, not looking for much money, only 17 years old, potential 3 to 4 pitch arsenal. If that changeup fully develops, the stuff could be borderline filthy with above average movement and really good control. Good stamina, really good at holding on runners. Camden Reisinger, just don't like the personality here with the low work ethic. Also questionable whether his third pitch is going to be starter quality, so I don't like him as much. Mike Patterson, average movement, above average stuff and control, but another guy who might only be a 2-pitch guy. Is the fastball going to be major league quality? Maybe. Who knows? Is the changeup going to develop at all? Maybe. Who knows? Really dependent on that changeup developing. So Patterson and Reisinger are the two that I like the least. Jorge Navarro, high leadership, work ethic, intelligence. Potentially above average stuff, movement, and control. Potentially a 4-pitch arsenal, although it could be a 2-pitch arsenal if things don't go well. Plenty of stamina, good at holding on runners. Don't like the fragility at 18 years old, though. Is a lefty. And then another lefty, in addition to Silva and Navarro, is Kevin Flater, 19-year-old. Another guy with more than acceptable stamina, great at holding on runners. Pretty well balanced, plus stuff, plus control, movement, potentially a bit above average. Going to have to figure out how to keep the ball in the park. But I'm really intrigued by a potential 6-pitch arsenal with Colossus Flater. Now you're going to need that change to develop, the splitter to develop. None of the pitches necessarily look to be world class, but it's not inconceivable that you could end up with 5 or 6 above average pitches, which would be a pretty effective arsenal for a potential starter. I really like several of these pitchers, and as I talked about, they're not looking for big money. I think Flater's my guy. But I'm not in love with any of them. And I think I can push the envelope a bit. Maybe one of them, other than Patterson or Reisinger, who I'm not as high on, falls to the third round. Some of these 3.5-star guys that I haven't talked through with you are interesting also. I don't like that Stubblefield is a man without a position. You're picking an 18-year-old, and he's probably a DH. But that bat has a lot of potential. Don't like that he's not much of a team player with that low leadership. But will have positive personalities around him. And I just think that contact slash gap power with that above average speed could play pretty well in Oakland. And he also potentially has borderline prodigious home run power. He's not going to be around with our next pick in the third round. There's a chance that one of those pitchers is. Kevin Metters is also intriguing, another guy who's not great defensively, although he's better. Like the high work ethic. Another guy who's fragile, though, but a very well-balanced and interesting bat. Switch hitter. But I think if Stubblefield reaches his full potential, he's a difference maker at the plate. And there's no way he lasts till the next round. Scouting director recommends him. If we were to go to a starting pitcher, he recommends Turpin, who I'd love to be able to grab in the third round. But we are going to go ahead with Mr. Stubblefield here. He's looking for slot, so we still will have financial flexibility if there's more expensive guys going forward. Pivoting from my strategy, but you can't be beholden to a strategy. You need to be strategic during the draft. And I think there's a chance one of those pitchers will still be around in the third round. Let's find out. We'll meet Stubblefield's demand. Move ahead. Take a look at the pitchers. And Patterson and Silva are still available. Patterson didn't like as much just because we don't know if he's really going to have the arsenal to be a starter. Silva, though, as a lefty, is pretty darn intriguing to me. 17 years old. Good enough stamina, really good at holding on runners. Don't love the extreme fly ball tendencies and the, at this point in his career, inability to keep the ball in the park. But he is a potential 3 to 4 pitch guy whose stuff and control could both be excellent. Well, above average, well above average, borderline excellent. With potentially above average movement. Hopefully we can maybe work on the movement and make him better at preventing the dingers. I'm going to take a look at some of the other pitchers and position players, but kind of setting up the way that we hoped it would when we made our second round pick with a guy like Silva still on the board. And we're going to try to play the numbers game again. I don't know if any of these 5 4-star prospects among position players are going to be available for us in the fourth round. But it's not impossible that 1 or 2 might be. And I really like 3 or 4 of these guys. So I am going to go with the pitcher Silva here in the third round. He's the last pitcher that I was thinking about in the second round that I really like. Not looking for a ton of money, so we're still going to have tons of money to spend, perhaps on a impossible to sign guy like Eric Fassbender down the line, who looks like he could be pretty interesting. Don't love the fragility. Don't love the greed. Don't love that there's no guarantee he's got a 3 or 4 pitch arsenal. But if he's sitting there in the 5th round and we've got a lot of money to spend, he might be pretty good value at that point. But we're going to go with Silva right now. And we will cross our fingers that after thinking about Silva in the second round and having him drop to the third, maybe the same thing happens with one of the position players here as we head to the fourth. Interesting that Patterson is still around. He's getting to the point where even though he might only end up being a reliever, the value's not bad. but the batters has worked out perfectly. All 5 of those 4-star guys are still around. Now I'm going to get greedy and hope that one of them also falls to us in the 5th round. And I'm getting greedy now, hoping that one of these guys, or maybe Patterson, falls to the 5th round. I can make a case for any of these guys. Hopefully we'll be able to talk through another one of them in the 5th round. But we're going to go with the center fielder, Greg Austin, almost 19 years old. Think his contact could be above average. His gap power, borderline excellent, well above average power, ability to draw some walks. He's got pretty good speed to take advantage of that gap power. He's a more than competent corner outfielder who could play center field in a pinch. Don't love the low leadership, but for a 4th round player, switch hitting outfielder with this profile, it's becoming a numbers game for us as far as the number of high school players that we're just trying to pump through this organization, a numbers game in terms of how many we can develop, and also, unfortunately, a numbers game of can we develop them quickly enough to get a chance to see them in the majors before we potentially lose our job. Scouting director recommends the pitcher Ernesto Soto. Questionable whether he's going to have a 3-pitch arsenal. Do really like the durability. Nice combination of stamina and holding runners. Stuff could be outstanding. Control not great. If he's around next round, he could be in the mix, but there's other batters that we'd love to have fall. And as we talked about, between Patterson, between the impossible to sign Fassbender, between Soto, there could be some interesting guys in the 5th round as well. If we were to sign a batter, our scout recommends Josh Lundy, potential 2-way guy, but he is certainly not on my short list right now. I think we're going to have an interesting opportunity in the 5th round also, but we're going to go with Greg Austin here in the 4th. Still got 3 of these guys ahead of us here in the 5th round. This draft, again, I might not survive. I know those of you who are telling me to draft college players are probably screaming at me right now. You didn't draft enough college players. I don't know if I've drafted any college players after looking at all those JUCO guys. But the talent that we have available here in the 5th round, this could be a franchise-altering draft for these Oakland A's. Because I'm going to look at these 3 other guys who I've been looking at for the last couple rounds that I haven't shared with you. And for the 5th round and not looking for much money, there's some interesting players here. Andy Scott, very well-balanced hitter potentially, decent speed, competent defensively with a gun of an arm in center field. Good personality in the clubhouse. Left-handed hitting outfielder. Very interesting. Hudson Blashill. I love the glove. And he looks like he is a competent hitter. Speed is mediocre. He's faced poor quality competition. Don't know a ton about his personality, but a really good glove with a bat that looks like it could be more than competent is pretty interesting. I'm guessing Fanshawe College is somewhere in Canada. I've never heard of it. I guess that doesn't mean it's not American. There's lots of colleges out there. And then Alejandro Almonte is a guy that I'm really intrigued by. Well-balanced bat, gap power, and home run power really good. Really good speed. Like the high leadership and work ethic. Doesn't necessarily have a position, We could play him in a corner outfield spot if we had to. Could play him at DH. Could play him at second if we had to. Wouldn't love it, but it's an interesting bat. To be fair, the competition level is poor. But for 5th round picks, Almonte, Blashill, and Scott are pretty interesting to me. Pitching wise, Ernesto Soto, who our scout recommended last round, is around. Mike Patterson, who we've been talking about for several rounds now, is still around. Even if he ends up a reliever, 5th round, not a particularly ambitious spot to pick him at. But some of these guys are going to get harder for other teams to pick in the 6th, 7th round. It's not inconceivable to me that we may still get guys that we really like in those later rounds, and we've got plenty of money, to spend $650, $1.3, even $1.7 million on some of these guys. So it's a deep draft, as we talked about, but I still think it's broke very well for us. I am really intrigued by Hudson Blashill's glove with a solid bat and good home run power. I don't love the poor level of competition. I don't love that we don't know about his personality. Almonte, also a poor level of competition, but a really interesting bat, nice speed. He does have those personality traits that we like. But I'm going to go with Andy Scott. A very well-balanced left-handed bat. Some personality traits that are positive. He's got that gun in right field. He's competent defensively. He could also be a interesting third baseman. I don't think it's a perfect fit, but above average range, and that arm plays well in the infield also. He's got enough speed to take advantage of that gap power, even though he's not a particularly good base stealer, and he has no instincts at all as a base runner. Those are things we can work on a little bit with him. If we were to go with a batter, our scout still recommends Josh Lundy. Might have to fire him because he, to me, does not have the same type of ceiling as some of these other guys. But we're going to go with Andy Scott here in the 5th round. And I feel like we're still going to have, between the pitchers and some of these position players, someone interesting lingering in the 6th. Almonte still around in the 6th, so we lost the real good defensive shortstop, but we've got the one left with a much better bat and better speed, and we know about his personality. So Almonte is very intriguing to me as a 6th rounder. Pitching-wise, Soto is still out there. He's durable, really good stamina and holding runners. Question is just whether he has the arsenal to actually be a starter. And the control's a little bit of an issue. I'd love it if Soto somehow fell to the 7th round. Our scout's been propping him to us for several rounds at this point. And I guess he's moved on from him to Jeremy Scholl. Another guy you question whether the third pitch develops, but as a potential 7th rounder, I'd be happy with either of them. Don't know that they're going to last. But I think I've been considering Almonte in my mind since the 3rd round at this point. Obviously haven't pulled the trigger on him. But a 6th rounder who's potentially above average at everything offensively, above average speed, good personality traits. We can find a spot for him in the field somewhere. He could hit enough that he could be a DH. Don't love the poor competition level, but as a 6th round pick, how can I not like someone like Almonte? Scout recommending Noah Malone. The scout, I'm not impressed with your decision making. We're going to go with Almonte here in the 6th, and we're going to hope maybe one of those pitchers is still around in the 7th. Scholl and Soto are still around, so I'm going to do a deep dive offline just to make sure I'm not missing something since I've powered through these last few rounds, but I'm very pleased with the depth we're potentially getting out of this draft. And I know that I've spent so much time talking that I've already lied to you about this likely being a short episode. I'm sorry about that. You'll have to forgive me. And there are still some interesting position players that could potentially fall to us in the 8th round, but we are going to finally pivot back to another pitcher here in round number 7. Scout recommending Brad Schering, second baseman. Interesting bat. If he's around in the 8th round, we would think about him. If we have to go with a pitcher, he's still on Jeremy Scholl. Potentially plus stuff in control, average movement. Question is whether he develops that 3rd pitch. He needs the changeup to develop, and he also needs to get that fastball to a 50 to have a starter's arsenal. I also don't love that he's 18 and a half and he's barely touching 90 miles an hour. So I think we go with Soto. He's younger, he's durable, really good stamina and holding on runners, some positive personality traits. Don't love the potential for him to give up a lot of home runs as a fly ball pitcher. Don't love the lack of control. Don't love that we're really reliant on that changeup developing to potentially fulfill that stuff. But I think we're looking for the ceiling here with the 7th rounder. And I think Soto gives us the highest possible ceiling as a left-handed arm. Worst case scenario, I think he could be a useful bullpen arm if he he could be a useful bullpen arm worst case scenario. With that durability and that stamina, he could be a potentially outstanding stopper. But honestly, if he develops the skills to be a stopper, with that stamina, he also very well could end up in the rotation. So I think as a 7th rounder, pretty darn good value here on Mr. Soto. Welcome to Oakland. And in the 8th round, Jeremy Scholl is still available. I think we take a flyer on him here. There are still some hitters I like. There's still some other pitchers I like. As I said, it's a very deep draft, and I like what we've been able to do in it. If I do anything else interesting over these next 12 rounds, I'll let you know. But I may kick myself for not picking up the knuckleballer Mr. Rojas. And while we're thinking about it, I am going to put him onto our short list so we can track what he accomplishes over the course of his career, and I can be second guessed and reminded of those of you who first guessed me on him, which is more than appropriate. I've already forgotten I think it was Juan Rojas, right? No, it was not Juan Rojas. Or maybe it was another guy named Juan Rojas. It was Ron Rojas. No, it was not. Finally we have found him. My friend Andres Rojas. And we will add him to the prospect shortlist so we can track his career. Definitely may regret not picking him, but and he wasn't looking for crazy money either, so we likely would have been able to do a very similar draft even if we had picked him in the first round instead of Ramirez. But the fact that we were so far under slot with Ramirez has allowed us to pick a few players like Austin and Scott looking for more money, and then even get guys like Almonte and Soto when we had no money set aside for them. So it's worked out, I think, pretty well. I really like our first 8 picks, and as I said, if there's anything real interesting these last 12 rounds, I will be sure to inform you of it. And here in the 9th round, there's several interesting catchers available. The one I actually like the least is the highest regarded, Jeremy Gentile. Just don't like some of those negative personality traits, but potentially has incredible power. I'm going to grab one right now, and honestly, if the right one is available in the 10th round, I think I'm going to pick another one just to give us some depth. But Jaden Bouquet, potentially above average defensively, acceptable arm, 60 contact, 60 power, not a ton of speed. But for a 9th round pick, if he completely develops, he's a starting quality catcher. He's not a superstar, but he will hit enough and field enough to certainly start for a lot of teams. No guarantees it all works out, but we are going to go ahead and draft him. Tommy Cowan, don't love him as much defensively, but he does potentially have that really interesting home run power. The other catcher, but Greg Bain is still around. Greg Bain's pretty interesting too. Competent defensively also. A little bit of above average home run power, but an incredible eye. And I didn't hate Jacob Butler Jr. either. Pretty good contact hitter. Not a great defensive player. We've got some options. And we're going to go with Greg Bain over Tommy Cowan here in the 10th round. Really like the home run power from Tommy Cowan. But Bain's a little bit better defensively. We think he still should hit some home runs, and he's got a good ability to draw walks. We're going to bring him on board in round number 10. And we moved ahead a day from the draft. Alejandro Almonte, who I believe was our 6th or 7th rounder, 6th rounder, already signed. We'll make sure to get him in the lineup down in rookie ball. We did extend the length of our seasons a bit so that our newly drafted players will be able to play for a few weeks of action when they're first drafted. So that should at least give us an early look at how they function in professional baseball. We did win yesterday 6-3. Still got a lot of work to do. But the attention now is going to turn into trying to extract some value out of our position players and our pitchers who aren't big part of our long-term plans. And I think you can probably say that about 70% of the people who are on our major league roster right now. And we talked in the last episode about Anthony Santander being someone we'd be willing to trade, particularly with the strong financial situation we're in right now after not spending as much in the draft. Justin Weeks brought up the very good point that, if we retain all of that contract for this year, we may see some more interesting options for him. So if we retain the entire contract for Santander, will there be any interesting prospects for him? There's at least young players to think about. I'm guessing none of them are going to be huge stars, but it is definitely a larger and more comprehensive list than we had been getting previously. So I don't know that we're going to do anything immediately with him. A lot of these players we probably need to get updated scouting reports on. Fortunately, we still do have almost 3 weeks until the trade deadline. So, really, over the next couple of days of game time, which I will probably play through between now and the next episode, I'm just going to be shopping a lot of the players that we'd like to get rid of, trying to get an idea of some of the prospects that we might be more interested in picking up for them, and ensuring, for instance, that this 23-year-old third baseman, Lucas Kennedy, who looks like he could be competent defensively and competent offensively, that we are at least going to be at a very high scouting accuracy with him before we have to start making decisions. So between now and our next episode, a lot of shopping and a lot of scouting, and hopefully we will get the last 6 players that we've had to make offers to in the draft onto our roster as well, and get to see a couple weeks of action out of all of them before they begin resting up for the winter and their first full season of professional baseball next year. But I'm pretty pleased with the draft. I think it all worked out really well. It was a deep draft. It seemed to break in our favor. We got a lot of guys that we liked a round or 2 or 3 rounds earlier, later in the draft than I thought they could have gone. I don't know that we got a superstar in anybody that we picked, but I do feel that we could potentially have 4 or 5 guys who end up being major league contributors if things work out reasonably well. And if we can get 4 or 5 guys who we can get 6 or 7 years at the minimum salary and then arbitration type salaries, who are productive major league players, that's what we've got to do in this Oakland A's organization. So I feel like this could be a foundational draft for us, even though maybe there's no superstar in the group. But we've got to survive long enough to find out what these guys can actually do in the majors. And we'll find out if we're able to track down any other players to join them in the minors in our next episode. And we'll also find out if maybe we can play a little better baseball over the second half of the season than we have thus far, to keep ourselves from being completely embarrassed by the performance we're putting up on the field this year. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.